It was September of 2020. Does anyone else just have a blank spot where 2020 was? Like, people are like, hey, remember when this happened? You're like, I don't. I really don't. I don't remember any of it. I feel sad, but I have no memories, right? I've been investigating that for myself. Our little church was just beginning to come out on the other side of COVID. We were less than a year old. We had started in September of 2019. We had endured 4 to 5 months of Zoom church, okay? Church over Zoom. So like, you know that thing in Zoom meetings where you're like, what do you guys think of this? And everybody tries to talk, and then they say, what about, hey, what? Mute. No, you, okay, you go. Okay, that was our whole church service. It was awesome. I wanted to die. So we went from there to meeting in the backyards of some of our people, specifically the Henrys, who are no longer here. They've moved to Northern Ohio, but they graciously let us use their space. And then we moved to this little outdoor pavilion where in New Beginnings, where out on 36, 37, you guys have probably seen it. They built it not too long ago. They have this little outdoor pavilion that they were in while their building was being built. And they're like, yeah, you could use this. It was fun. We had rain. We had heat. They had these plastic like tarps that would like snap in the wind really loud. And that was fun. It was cold sometimes. There were these geese that occupied the pond next door, so there was goose poop everywhere. The kids met in a garage. It was awesome. It really was. It graciously let us do it. The setup and tear down was really complicated. But while we were there, we did what we do here. We sought the Lord's face together. That's what we've always been about. We go hard, right? I remember I had just finished Emotionally Focused Formations, which is the 6-month kind of cohort-led spiritual direction aspect of Emotionally Focused that comes after Foundations. It's only like $80 for 6 months of coaching. It's the best deal you'll ever find. Shameless plug. And I had discovered for myself some serious obstacles in my relationship with God. Probably the chief of which was an inability to pray. I was having a hard time. If you're like me and you have extended exposure to the church, right, for any length of time, it's actually pretty easy to talk the talk of prayer. You can pick up on it pretty quick. This might look like you expressing this insight that you got from your quiet time that you did 3 weeks ago and haven't done since, or something you heard on a podcast that someone said. You're like, wow, that was good, like it's yours. Or something that sounds really eloquent when you say it, but like the deeper you dig, the less sense it really makes. Then you're kind of like, I probably need to investigate that more. And then you just are like, it's scary. I'm probably not going to look at that, right? Don't look at it. More likely, though, you probably just don't talk about it at all, right? And in fact, in the Western church, probably the only people who are going to ask you about your prayer life are annoying people like pastors, right? They're probably going to just be like, well, what's your relationship with the Lord like? And you're like, oh, no one's asked me that since 1982, right? People will mostly just leave you alone, right? Talking the talk is pretty easy. Walking the walk is a pretty different kind of thing. What I was finding in 2022 as at that time a 12-year disciple of Jesus was that I had so much unfinished pain and grief to work through with God. It was keeping me from engaging the one true lifeblood of our relationship with Him, right? The foundation of spirituality, the discipline of the disciplines, which is prayer. I couldn't get there. So we're doing our time of testimony on this Sunday morning, as we do now, and Hope and I have a baby due in 2 to 3 months. We had been turned down for our 4th home application. The church was struggling to get back on its feet. We were potentially going back to lockdown at any moment. There was always this threat of impending, you have to go back home. And someone, I can't remember who, had the gall to ask me, where do you see the Lord working in your life? As if that's what we set that time apart for. That's a joke. It is. I remember I started to complain, which is usually my default. I started to complain about all the things that were jacked up in my life right now and everything that seemed wrong. But instead, I found myself saying this exactly. And I remember this so vividly. I think for the first time in my life, I am learning how to pray. I did not know the significance of that confession at the time or how important that moment would be for me. I have thought about that moment probably every week since then, as I try to continually figure out what this thing is that we have with the God of the universe. This like unparalleled access, right? Endless grace, incredible favor that just blows my mind. Paradoxical care from him that can feel hurtful at times, an openness and encouragement to honesty that never shames us. It's unlike anything any of us have ever experienced in life. Obviously, the deeper I go personally and the more I explore the lives of saints who are walking this out way ahead of me, like light years, and hear stories of God's love and power, the crazier it all seems. It just feels like it doesn't make any sense, and yet it works. So when we do something like 40 Days of Prayer every year, I feel so grounded in that moment. I feel like I'm there again. Not only of how good the Lord is to us, right, which is evident, and how far he can take us, but to like paraphrase a disciple that I look up to, Leanne Payne, in 4 years, God has transformed my interior world from a desert, right, lifeless, barren, scary, hot then cold, right? Filled with sand, it's coarse, right? Into a garden. Plentiful, beautiful, ripe, life-bearing, right? That's the work that the Lord can do in us, and it's beautiful. A huge part of that process has made me feel a lot like the woman in this story. The persistent widow. I prefer the enduring widow. Persistent feels like a southern backhanded compliment, right? Like, you're just so persistent. God bless your heart, right? That doesn't feel like a real good adjective. I like enduring. That makes sense to me. Regardless, this widow from Jesus is our image and our example for one thing. Makes it clear. To always pray and not give up, which is wild. This is the beginning of what Jesus called a parable. Just simply a story to illustrate a deeper truth about reality or the self or the nature of God. That's all they're for. Historically, the parables of Jesus have been lifted up as like masterpieces of formational architecture. Like they're just these beautiful things. And the cool thing about them is they grow with you. So you don't like age out of these stories. It's why even the people who feel like they are masters of the spiritual life, they can look back on these and be like, this makes sense. And it has only made more sense as we go, right? They're these beautiful things. And so as the Spirit sheds more light and reveals more and more and more, we see Jesus using these numerous times when all the time, specifically when the disciples first heard it, and then it becomes more and more powerful, actually, as successive generations of disciples are listening to these stories, right? The book of Luke was likely written like 50 years after Jesus has ascended into heaven. And so this parable meant something to the disciples when he said it in that moment, and it means something to them 10 years later, and it meant something to the disciples that came 20 years later. It meant something to people who lived in the year 500 and 800 and 1000. 1500 today, 2023. We're 2,000 years removed from 2024. Sorry, we're still 2,000 years, even more removed from when Jesus first said these stories, and yet they still speak to us with such incredible power. It's amazing. Whenever we hear Jesus begin to tell one of these stories, we're invited to sit up and listen closely. And fortunately for us, this parable is a rare occasion where Jesus just right off the bat states the purpose before the story even begins. Because we need help, right? So we have two main characters. The first one is who? The judge, and then the enduring widow, right? First, the judge. His biography is pretty simple. He did not fear God. He did not care what people thought. Judges in ancient Israel were powerful people who were put in those positions to ensure that justice occurred from God's divine decree in every case. Literally, they would say that the Lord's favor falls on the one who the judge chooses, right? That's the side who's telling the truth. That's the goal. And that's how their judgments were viewed. This judge, however, had no fear of God, right? Meaning that he was not a practitioner of the law. He did not care about how his role was meant to protect those whom God said needed protecting. And he also didn't care what people thought, which is not like a healthy, I'm not a people pleaser kind of thing. I dated a girl once who would say that she didn't care what people thought, which meant that she immensely cared what people thought, right? It's more, if you translate this literally from the Hebrew, it means a person without a conscience. That's who this judge is. He has no conscience. He has no sense of right or wrong, and he doesn't care how it affects people. Basically, he is an unjust judge. By the very nature of his character, he is unable to do his job well because his only care is for himself, his position, and his power. That's what we learn in one quick verse. And then we have the widow. In this situation, the implicit assumption is that she is a new widow. Otherwise, she might not be called a widow. She might have a different characteristic. But the fact that she's defined as a widow means this is something that's probably likely happened to her. If your picture of a widow is someone who's like way older and their spouse has passed away, remember in the first century, you could be a widow by like 32 years old, right? So I know I look like I'm near death, but I'm only 31. So we could be widows. Widows were considered a group of people in need of protection in Hebrew culture. They're defenseless and they're easy to take advantage of. The reason being that there were very few jobs that they could work that would bring in enough money for them to survive. If they didn't have children to take care of them, there was really very few ways for them to make an income. They could not own property. So they could not own a home on their own, right? This is not a good position. Many of them would end up turning to prostitution or indentured servitude to make ends meet if no one was able to take care of them. And that's why the law had special preservations for them. They were to be looked out for by the state in the same way that orphans and foreigners were. They had a ton of protections for these people who needed it. They were a people for whom God's heart especially broke for. That's the biggest thing here. That's why actually, if you wanted to have like a fun Google search, all throughout the Old and New Testament, tons of miracles happen to widows. It's actually really fun. If you just type in widows and miracles in the Bible, there's I think like 6, 7, 8 stories right off the bat of widows who have received the favor and joy of the Lord through the miraculous. It's really cool. So this woman, full of grief, seeking justice, is in court day after day after day after day, without fail, seeking some level of vindication. This is what she wants. So you're aware, just again, this story continues to have greater depth. In the court system at the time, it's not like here where you hire legal experts to argue for you. She is arguing her own case against the person that is trying to take advantage of her, right? Her enemy. So she doesn't have a lawyer while she sits there and like cries at a table. Not only is she filled with grief, but she now also has to come up with a logical, meaningful, consistent argument against someone else so that she can have the justice she deserves. She is in a tough position all the way around, right? It's crazy. The fact that the widow kept coming to him for justice from her adversary meant that this was something of incredible importance, likely something for her that's life and death. But he is not a good judge, right? Regardless of the fact that it's clear that she's in the right, he is not a good judge. He is powerful and she is not. He is wealthy and she is not. He is well known and she is not. He is secure and she is not, and he refuses her time and time and time and time again. And then seemingly randomly, right? He has a change of heart, sort of. Not really, but kind of. He says to himself, not to anyone else, to himself, though I don't fear God and I don't care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice so that she won't eventually come and attack me, which I love. That's like one of my favorite things in the Bible right now. The implication here is that her pleas were evolving into something more and more intense, right? Which I love. I'm so stubborn, and something about this appeals to me so much, to just like have this. He is not afraid she will come and attack him physically. The phrase here is, she won't come and give me a black eye, right? Socially, emotionally, right? What they're basically saying is that she has the capacity to ruin his reputation by a public denouncement of his character as a judge. Scholars that I was reading seem to think this implies she was basically just following him around, pleading her case everywhere he was. In the garden, there she was. When he's getting groceries, there he is. Whatever else first century judges were doing in public, she was there. She was that close to him, just like pleading her case over and over again. While he's meeting with other officials, she's right outside the door, waiting, right? I love it so much. It makes me laugh. She gets her justice by appealing to the only thing the unjust judge cares about, his status and his appearance, right? That's how she gets what's right. And in a classically biblical way, the widow, the least powerful, the literal least of these, beats impossible odds and wins the day with her continual plea. This is where the story ends. Isn't that beautiful? We all got to be some widows. What do we have to learn from this incredible woman about prayer? Basically, there's one concept, two applications, one challenge. It's pretty straightforward. Thankfully, Jesus spells a lot of this out for us. It's pretty nice. The argument, the concept that is worth sitting in today is this thing that actually Jesus would do a lot. It's called an argument from lesser to greater. Okay? He actually often uses this to talk about God. Actually, Chelsea reminded me of this week in our small group, right? So this verse might seem familiar to you. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Right? The logic is clear. You as a good parent, you don't want to give your children stones or snakes. At least I hope not, right? When they ask for food. So what God the Father will not do less than that, right? Or look at this one. Matthew 6, 28 through 30. Why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all of his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Do you trust him to take care of you like he takes care of the flowers of the field? And so then we come to Luke 18. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. Here's the logic. Here's how he flows. If an unjust, morally reprehensible judge can be convinced to act according to justice by unceasing pleas from a powerless, annoying widow, how much easier then, I know this is wordy, but this is just how the logic flows, How much easier then must it be to convince the God of the universe to initiate justice for his chosen ones? Or put more simply, God is obviously working on your behalf because he is justice. He is justice incarnate. Right? It's a contrast. It's not a comparison. The goal is not to see similarities between the unjust judge and God the Father. It's the incredible contrast between these two beings, right? They're not even close. The unjust judge by his character is unable to even know what justice is. The God of the universe is justice himself. So of course then, chosen ones, will he keep putting them off? The answer is no. He will see that they get justice, and quickly. So what are our two applications? Again, Jesus spells this out for us. It's really nice when Jesus does your sermon prep for you. There's basically two. Always pray and never give up. It's the same argument from lesser to greater. Here's something I believe wholeheartedly, right? I believe that being a disciple of Jesus is very, very difficult. It's hard. And the more you go, I think the harder it actually gets. It's a little bit paradoxical because the more grace you also receive. But I think it's actually super hard. If you believe that Jesus meant the things he said that he did, that both in this world you will have trouble, which he demonstrated for us by living a human life right in front of us, and if you believe what he said, that choosing his path and school of living is not only the way to ultimate salvation, but is also the key to the best, most free kind of life you can live today. If you believe both those things, then you know how at times it feels like every single thing in this world and in your flesh pushes against that sometimes. I mean, it can feel like a lot when you're really trying. There is constant, daily, internal and external resistance to being conformed to the image of Christ and choosing to be like him. It feels like it's happening all the time. We know that living actually in a fairly comfortable environment in the 21st century West, right? Like we're doing pretty good on the whole, let alone the first century when Jesus' disciples were actively being persecuted by the state and by their neighbors and by their families, right? All the time, constantly. The purpose of this parable, when Jesus originally spoke it to his closest disciples, and then when it was read by churches in writing 50 years later, and when we read it today, is to remind us that God is the God of justice who will not fail us, time and time again. Because disciples of Jesus are struggling. They're not doing the best, right? Especially in this moment, Jesus does not seem to be getting anywhere. Right? They've been following Jesus around for 18 chapters at this point in Luke. And what he's managed to do is heal some people and then make everyone else super angry. And now people are mocking them, and he's got 12 people, right? If you guys came here and there were only 12 people sitting in the room, the majority of churches in America would say that that's a failure. Correct? That's not a standard of success by most people. And that's where Jesus was. He had 12 people, and maybe in a little extended group outside of that. But that was it. And he kept saying, hey, I've got 12 people. Also, I'm the God of the universe. Okay, Jesus. Like, we'll see, I guess. Right? They're struggling. He makes the wrong people angry. He's constantly under attack. He hasn't accrued any wealth. And what he does have, he gives away. Rome hasn't fallen yet, which is the only thing they wanted. And the people who follow him are mocked in the streets. Is it worth it? Is it worth all this sacrifice? I gave up my job to do this. I gave up my friends. I have a family at home. Is it worth it? Is it worth being so different? Right? Is it worth the hard work? Can anybody relate to this? I don't know. That just makes sense to me. I don't know sometimes if it feels like it's worth it. Jesus promised them and promises us that one day he will right every wrong that has ever occurred, especially to those who call him Lord. He will sit on the throne of creation, presiding over every kingdom on earth. He has very briefly given us a glimpse of eternity as a place where there is no more weeping, there's no more pain, there's no more grief or struggle. And here's where it hits home for us, using the lesser to greater framework, right? If he will bring us comfort on that great day, ultimately, right? When all of this is over. The question is, how much more is he willing and able to comfort us today at much lesser times, right? In your day-to-day walk with him. Why would he not be willing to comfort you today, Sunday, January, what is it, the 7th? Is it 8th? January 8th, if he's willing to usher in a whole new creation of blessing and joy. This feels like a pretty simple task for him, right? But it's hard to believe sometimes. And if he's willing to do that, if he's willing to bring about ultimate justice and vindication on that great day, where he's going to right every wrong and wipe every tear, and we're going to see that happen in real time, would he not be able or willing to bring about justice today? I think maybe he would. Does that feel fair? Right? I think at much lesser moments, if he's able to totally circumvent all of creation to bring about a new kingdom and a new heaven and a new earth, he might be able to do a little bit of something today when you're like mad that your tire went flat, or like somebody cheats, or somebody gets upset at you, right? Somebody calls you a bad name. You get skipped for a promotion, right? Any of the things. It seems like he could bring justice out of that. The only bridge in the Christian tradition that I know of for experiencing what Jesus is talking about right here, this immediacy, not just knowing it intellectually, not just reading a book or hearing someone teach you about it, which I'm glad you're here though. There's only one word that I know of, and that's prayer. Prayer is the only means of grace that I know to experience in real time the things that Jesus says are ultimately true, right? That access to him. Sitting in the presence of the God who loves you. Listening to what he has to say about your situation. Not what you think he has to say. Not what he should say. Not what you think. What he has to say about it. Talking to him about your thoughts and your feelings and your experiences. Right? This is what happens in prayer. This is the link. This is how we receive what we need to receive in the journey of life. This is how we are energized to not give up, right? This is how we notice how God is at work in the world, how he is bringing about justice in his own way, in his own timing, as he must. And it's through prayer that what God is doing even makes sense to us at all, right? It often does not seem like it makes sense because it almost never looks the way we think it should. Sometimes his justice and his comfort are dead quiet. It's silent. And you're like, nothing is happening. This is the worst. I'm going to go make something happen. Right? Sometimes it is rambunctious and it is loud and it is overwhelming. Sometimes it is through natural means and sometimes supernatural means. Sometimes it literally falls out of the sky by total chance and you could have never seen it coming. Sometimes it's something that's been in the work for decades and is finally coming to fruition, right? And we want what we want now, today, ASAP. That's when we want justice. That's when we want comfort. Make it happen now, right? I would join you in that. We have to wrestle with this in prayer. We have to. To experience his comfort and his justice and his love as the God of love, we have to wrestle with this in prayer. It's the only option. The encouragement here is to know we do not actually come to God as widows to an unjust judge. That too is a contrast. There has been bad teaching on this passage that would say the value of prayer you learn from this is to constantly be knocking on God's door and annoy him until he does what you want him to do. Because he moves history for people who pray, right? That is true. That is not the spirit of how we pray. The difference here, pestering God endlessly to get him to do the right thing versus what is actually true of us. Praying ceaselessly so that we actually know what the right thing is. That's the difference here, right? We often have no idea what the right thing is. We think we do, but we're often wrong. Prayer is more for us than it is for God. He will do things when we pray that he would not do otherwise. I know that for a fact, and I've seen it happen, right? At the same time, most of my prayers for him to do things change me, not him. I get a glimpse at God's heart, and I'm like, oh, I'm wrong, right? Does anyone else love saying that you're wrong? No, it's the worst. It's been the most formative thing in my life. I'm wrong. I'm often wrong, right? This is difficult. He knows your fight. He knows your struggles. He knows your joys. He knows you want justice. Here's the thing. Talk to him about it. Approach the throne room boldly, honestly, and receive the grace that's there when you do it really poorly most of the time, which is my prayer life. That's why whenever I die, if Hope doesn't do it, please burn my prayer journals. Please burn my prayer journals. Do not read them, burn them. Or else you will not think the same thing about me that you do now. Maybe. There is one final challenge. It's the end of the last verse of this passage, right? This is where it all kind of hits home. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? When that great day does come, that day of ultimate justice and ultimate comfort, whether it be at your death or when he comes again in glory, here's the question. What kind of person will he find you to be? It's not a judgmental question. It's simply very honest. Will it be like you've met for the first time? Will it be like seeing a longtime friend? Will he know you to be someone who depended on him for comfort and strength and encouragement throughout your journey? Will he know you as someone who prayed without ceasing, who never gave up? This is the question he's asking. And this is your invitation today and every day. This is the kind of work that we sit in. To be the kind of disciple who follows their master no matter the cost. No matter the cost. To ourselves, to others, leaning on him in difficulty, leaning on him in celebration, leaning on him in trials, tribulations, and victories, to cast your cares upon him as he cares for you, right? This is our encouragement. And this is the kind of disciple that Jesus hopes you will choose to be, right? At Delco, we always have a time of response because we believe that God's word does not return void. We think that there are seeds being planted that Satan, the enemy of your soul, would happily scoop and scatter and grab for himself. We're also going to transition to a time of ministry for the 40 days of prayer. This is a new thing that we've been doing to try to test it out and see